Hi everyone. I have had a few flights recently that I haven't recorded on video because I wanted to just concentrate on the flying and learning itself and didn't want to have to fiddle around with camera and audio settings and devices and all the rest. And the reason for that is that the last 6 or 7 flights have all been essentially consolidation flights. I've been repeating the same things that I've learned in the past to just try and improve those big or little issues that were getting into the way of me having a shot at the RPL test. So I actually had a booking for an RPL test yesterday, Tuesday. So it's Wednesday when I'm recording this, and I decided along with my instructors to not do the actual test because there were a few things that I had to improve. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So I converted those booked flights into instructional flights and rebooked my RPL test for 2 weeks from now. So in this video, since I haven't got the actual recordings from the flights, I don't have the video recordings, I've got data recordings. I thought I would use those data recordings to walk through the types of exercises that I did over the last couple of weeks, and maybe also focus on some of the deficiencies that I discovered. And these are mainly things that I was able to do at some point in the past, but I somehow regressed. That's got to do mostly with landings. And a couple of other things that I just needed more work, especially forced landings, because it was a change of environment and training area and all that, including a plane. So I needed to work through those issues first. Another thing that I've done recently, obviously you know about my data recorder here, the flight data recorder. There's an Arduino in this device. It's got a GPS and a few sensors inside. So I've been using this to record my flight data and then use the data with a few Python scripts to analyze it and also to superimpose flight instruments on my videos. But I've also started using CloudAhoy, which is pretty amazing actually flight analysis online application that I found quite useful to use to complement the videos. And even in the absence of having actual videos, I found that CloudAhoy is very good. So I just want to show you what's happened since my last log, which has been back in flight 56. It's when I practice short field takeoff and landings in the 150. I did some of that again just to consolidate. So I just wanted to show you what I've done since then. And that flight was back here. So I've had, as you can see, a bunch of flights since then, from July 24 to today. Now, as you can see, these flights since the new content, or the last new content that I've learned, the short field landings and takeoffs, have been repeats. So forced landings, you can see flight 57, circuits, lots of circuits trying to fix my landings, especially the biggest issue that I'm having with landings is that I need to be better at putting the plane down on the rear main wheels instead of my usual flat landings where all 3 wheels tend to touch at the same time. So I'm not going to go through the details there, but I am making progress there, and the technique there is to try and focus kind of towards the end of the runway, use the cowling as an assistant to help me with pitching the airplane appropriately and at the right time as it's losing energy and the altitude is increasing, to make sure that there is separation between the front wheel and the runway. But the main thing is to reduce speed and altitude in a controlled way so that eventually the main wheels touch down nicely, softly, without a big thump and bang, and of course to protect the front wheel. I'm probably going to talk more about that once I actually manage to execute the technique properly. So I'm making progress there. I've had a few really nice landings, but I had some also not very good landings. So this is still work in progress to just try and make this consistent, so that I always have good landings. So another thing that I've practiced is forced landings. Let's go into this one actually for a moment. Just want to show you what that looks like. Just going to switch off the audio. So I've done forced landings in Camden, but now that I'm training in the Cessnock training area and with a different school, things are slightly different there. So first of all, there is a new place. So there is this block of land here. I'm just going to switch off the overlays. So you can see there's a nice patch of land here. There's a few cows on it usually, so try not to scare the cows away. But we use this block of land. That's actually an old, currently unused runway. So this bit here is the runway. It's unused because it hasn't been really kept, so it's dangerous. There's usually water through here, but it's quite a good spot to be doing this sort of exercise. So we travel to Kurikuri, as this township here is called Kurikuri. The airport is down there. I'm just going to go a little bit higher. You can see here's the airport. So we travel from here to Kurikuri and we execute forced landings. Now, originally, back at Camden, I learned how to do forced landings using the high key, low key technique, which I've documented somewhere else in one of my logs. But in the school that I'm working with now, the way that it's being taught is to basically identify the landing strip that you want to put the plane on, and then use a spiral technique to decrease altitude and position the plane so that you have eventually a safe landing. And the idea here is to, once you identify a good spot to land, to stay close to it. This is how I was originally taught how to do this, and it's still a valid technique. It's just what you are better used to and what you've practiced. And in my case, as I'm a student, which way the school teaches to do forced landing. So this is what it looks like in the beginning. I'm just going to play this in fast forward. Let's fast forward a little. I'll just stop here. So we simulate engine failure, say at some point up here. This is a landing strip. The wind is coming, as the plane looks like here, from the left. So the idea is to position the plane in kind of a downwind tracking. Up here where my pointer is right now would be the beginning of downwind if this was a normal aerodrome. And you want to ensure that as the plane is gliding at this point, it's gliding at a rate of vertical speed that eventually, once you come through base and then final, you are in a good position to put the plane down. And you can use, of course, flaps and attitude to achieve that. But in this first attempt, I ended up too high. You can see here, I ended up too high. There's not much usable land here to land on, so I aborted. So there was a kind of not a good attempt. Then what happens after this is, I'm just going to get rid of all this. I climb to try again. Now this is what I want to show you next. So at another attempt, I position the plane again about, I think there was about 2,000 feet. Let's see what this says. Just going to close the video. So yeah, we're about 2,000 feet above ground, and position the plane at some point around here. We have the simulated engine failure, and the idea then is to instead of worrying too much about using high key, low key in terms of positioning the plane so that it is at downwind and then identifying base and all that, you say, okay, I want to land right there. I am at this altitude now. What I want to do is to get the plane somewhere so that I am familiar with my pattern at that point. And instead of moving around, so traveling in this example, as opposed to what I did in the previous attempt, traveling downwind and trying to estimate how far downwind I need to travel in order to lose sufficient altitude in order to then turn into base and final at the appropriate timing and altitude. We substitute all that thinking with doing spirals. So you can see here, I am executing a spiral, and in the Cessna 150, from about the time that a spiral begins to the time that you do a full, I guess in this case about 300-degree turn, you lose between 500 and 800 feet. And that kind of a pretty good number because you can depend on it. Then you can see I'm doing the turn here. I'm losing altitude. You can see the green line here is the altitude. It's pretty nice and linear. At this point here, I am, say, about 700 feet, which actually is not bad because then I can just do a steep turn. At that point, I'll just pause here for a second. You can see my speed goes up and down. We do try to, at least at the beginning of the glide, to use best glide speed, so about 60 knots for the C150. But as the situation is quite fluid, you can actually deviate. For example, here you can see that just move here, it's about here. You can see that I realize that I need to lose a little bit more altitude, so there's no problem. I can just pitch down a bit to lose more altitude. At that point, I'll have also deployed flaps, and I can control my speed, especially over speed, and eventually get to a satisfactory position. And I can be quite certain that at this point, I'll be able to make my landing, my chosen landing field, and I can just apply then full power and climb again, which is what happens here. So that was the main thing that I worked on. I'll just close that, yep, and then take off and try again. So I did that a few times. I felt quite comfortable and also did the same type of technique yesterday in my last, my last flight, which was actually an RPL mock-up test. I'm going to talk more about that later. Another thing that I practiced on this flight was departures and inbound calls, radio calls. I did all that. Quite interesting. Now, this is an interesting part of the inbound journey. So what happened here, okay, here's the airport right there. What happened here is we're coming inbound. The intention was to join downwind, made all the relevant calls, but we detected another plane in the circuit and about to turn downwind. Obviously, there was a conflict. Planes in the circuit have priorities. So what we did here was to do a steep left turn in order to allow the plane that was in the circuit to turn downwind safely. And then we just did another steep turn back into the circuit and kind of started joining here. But what happened after that was that the same plane was still kind of too close to us. So for the sake of separation, we did a quick steep turn just to do an orbit in order to improve separation. And after that, things were pretty normal. Actually, there was we did a couple of circuits after that. Okay, so that was flight 56, I believe. So it was quite interesting. Like it's always learning new things. And in this case, it was the forced landings, but also the experiencing this potential conflict. Actually, there was a conflict, wasn't potential, and what to do in order to rectify the situation, which is what we did here. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing that I want to show you, let's see if there's something interesting in circuit emergencies. So this is where I simply practiced the usual emergencies in a circuit, like simulated engine failures and glide approaches. One thing that I did here that was quite interesting as well, in one of those approaches, what we did was to do a glide approach from up here and eventually end up landing without any flap at all. So there was a glide approach with no flap, which is also always possible. And I repeated the same exercise in yesterday's RPL mock-up test. All right, so that was all about emergencies in the circuit. So in flight 61, that was it was a flight that was meant to be the actual RPL flight test, and because I wasn't actually going to do the test on the next day, we decided to make it kind of instructional. So what we did here was a bit of everything. You can see there's steep turns. So basically the instructor would tell me do this, do that. Without providing instruction on how to do it, so that that's James, so he could assess my capabilities. So here's one example. I'm doing some couple of turns, and the objective here is to lose as little altitude as possible. So if I'm just going to clean up a little here, and here's my spiral. Here's the first spiral. So here is what I began. So the blue line is the indicated airspeed. So hold on a second, let's select that bit only so we can see what's happening with the altitude. So green is altitude. So from the moment I started to the moment that I finished it, I lost 2,100, say. I actually lost quite a bit, so not so good. I did another one after that. I should have lost basically no altitude at all. There's another one here. Yeah, it was a bit better, less altitude lost. Actually right here. Yeah, delta altitude, you can see CloudAhoy is actually pretty good, 500 feet. When I did the same exercise on yesterday, I lost a lot less, about 100 feet. We'll have a look at that shortly. All right, so that's it. Then I did some forced landings. You can see this one actually was interesting. So the first one, let's go back. Just going to clean up. So this is where the second one began. And the idea here, again, not using the high key, low key technique, but essentially just do whatever you need in order to get the plane down. You can see here, I'm starting at about 1,000. Next one actually, yeah, about here. Let's start here. So you can see the altitude up here is 1,254. So that's about 1,000 feet above ground. So all I had to do to get the plane safely down was to do this kind of zigzag. There is a steep turn involved here. The steep turn is always safe because the turn is coordinated. Just keep an eye on the speed and have situational awareness as to where the landing strip is. But once we get to that spot right there, I think I was a little high. Yeah, that looks a little bit high. So then I tried again. The idea here was that all it takes to get to the field was to do just to extend this leg. Let's call it base, I guess. And then do a kind of sharp turn to get me to the final, and use attitude there. And I did use a lot of flap. And at that point, let's see, what is my altitude? Yeah, right there you can see the altitude is 300 feet. Yeah, a bit steep, but in case of an emergency, you know, my touchdown point would be around here, just past that kind of lake. It's like this is a wet area, so touchdown would be here, and there's quite enough time to fly in order to reduce the altitude to touchdown safely. Okay, we don't go any lower than that because there's cows and stuff here, so we don't want to scare them. We just divert to the left at full power. Okay, another thing then, just like the day before, on the way back, did my inbound calls and approached in. That was a non-event. So we did the inbound call and then joined the circuit on crosswind and landed without any issues. I think, yeah, we did a touch and go. And I practiced my landings in the remainder of that session. Another really cool thing that I haven't done before, just clean up, it was the very last thing that we did, was to climb up to 2,000 feet near the airport, so on the kind of northwest edge of the airport. And so you can see around here we are at almost 1,700 feet. I climbed to 2,000 feet, and that's where another simulated engine failure happened. So from this point onwards, I was gliding the plane. So I'm not sure if I can measure the distance. So here's the plane when the engine failure happened, and down here is the airport. So we glided all the way from here to there. And actually, it was a nice glide down. I'm just going to go to 10x speed with a successful full stop landing. Obviously cut short through base and final, but it was pretty easily, I guess easily done. It was easier than I expected. So that gave me a good sense of how far the Cessna 150 can glide. That's pretty cool. All right, so that's it with this flight. And there's one more. Here's flight 62, which was the mock RPL test. So we did everything here. All right, so this flight had everything. It had circuits, it had emergencies in the circuit. So here's one. This was so this segment here was a simulated engine failure, and again I was able to put the plane down quite nicely without having to use flaps at all. So that was pretty cool. Let's go to this part now. So what we did here was a departure on the crosswind leg east. So practice my radio calls for that, climbing to 2,000 feet. And then we did some steep turns. So as you can see, compared to the steep turn that I showed you earlier, let's go back a little. Very little altitude was lost. So that's the first one. And here's the other steep turn, left and right, and I'm pretty happy with this. It's almost no altitude loss, so I won't bother with bringing up the charts because we can see it here. So it was pretty cool. Then we did stalls and slow flights. All right, so here for slow and flight and stall, you can see speed dropping down to 47 knots. So I did two here, one normal and one with flaps, just to simulate stall on final, perhaps. With a little bit of drop wind or wing drop. So that was quite nice. And the interesting thing again is the altitude. Like on our stall situation, how little altitude was lost. Minimum was 41 knots, and the altitude lost from the beginning to the end of the stall. Yeah, about 150 feet, which is quite nice. It's pretty good. And that's when we went to Kari Kari to do more forced landings. So let's have a look at that. I did a spiral. So the instructor, we started up here with actually around here with the engine failure simulated, and identified the spot I wanted to land right there. Did a spiral. At that point I knew that I was about, I think, 800 feet. So let's move that a little more. Yeah. So about 800 feet when the engine failure occurred around here. I estimated I need to lose about, at this point, about 400 or 500 feet to be able to be positioned properly on the late final leg. So I did a spiral, and it worked out okay. I was just making sure that during the turn I wasn't going too slow and that the turn was coordinated. But again, the instructor, that's Phil, he emphasized the fact that we don't have to stick on the glide speed when we are attempting a forced landing, especially if we know where we're going and we know that the plane has got enough altitude and energy to get there. So if we need to descend faster, for example, we just lower the nose, descend faster in order to make sure that we are in a good position when the time comes. So that was cool. And then we turned back. So turned back 1,200 feet since we're going straight into the aerodrome to land. I didn't worry about climbing at that point, so we just remained on circuit altitude, made the call, and then what happened here, you can see there's a little curve that's kind of pronounced, is I was kind of overshooting. So here's the airport, here's the runway right there. So I was planning to go a little bit further in order to have like a kind of a closer downwind leg. It was a misjudgment, of course. We are supposed to turn around here on this facility, and I kind of delayed it. So Phil demonstrated how to do a proper turn in order to make sure that when you make a mistake, you don't make it worse by being too slow on the controls. So there was a quite steep 45-degree turn to get me back on track for a proper downwind. So that was quite fun, and it was a bit abrupt, so it was almost lost my lunch. Okay, after that, let's see. There was right, descent. Yeah, it was a proper descent. Nothing fancy here. Did a kind of half decent landing, so landings are still something that I need to work on. And that was it with the RPL mock-up exam. That actually was very, very good for me because I was able to just put all these elements together in what eventually will be the components that will make up the test. There's of course the ground components, which we also revised, but that was excellent because of the I guess the fluidity of switching from one exercise to the other, which I think was very useful, and I'd like to do something like that again, I guess, when I hopefully can train by myself after I get my RPL certificate. Okay, and that's it. So what happens next is that I've got a couple of bookings for flights to practice much of that, but landings is my weakest area here. Landings plus number two would be forced landings. Just really need to get a better feel of the plane's performance without the engine, so that way I'll be able to better judge how to handle it in order to put it down during a forced landing. Uh, the wind also plays a significant role in that, and that's why I also think that spirals help, because spirals can, especially if they're close spirals, they can be more forgiving to the effects of wind pushing you away from the aerodrome more than you thought it would be. If there's say a strong tailwind, it can push you too far away from your intended landing location, and then you just have to deal with a headwind. There's just not enough energy left in the plane to get you there without an engine. So I find that spirals like this, because the spirals keep you closer to where you want to land, as forgiving to the effects of wind. So I'd like to practice more of that. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you in the next one.